Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about a proposed bill in Maryland that would increase what waiters and servers and restaurant workers would be earning. Right now, there is a tip credit that allows people who are acting in a service capacity in restaurants to make $3.63 per hour, and with the assumption that the difference between that and what would be a standard minimum wage would be made up in tips. However, under the new House bill, there's a proposal that it would raise the pay from $3.63 per hour plus tips to $15 per hour plus tips. So that's a big change. So what are some things that restaurant owners should be thinking about as this bill makes its way through? I mean, it hasn't passed yet. It's still just kind of floating around there, but what would the impact be, you think, Russell?
Yeah, well, so to give even more context to it, the tip credit is something that operates at both the federal and the state level, but states can raise their minimum wage to whatever they want, and they can do away with the tip credit, which would, ostensibly do away with the federal provisions in that respect as well. Um, as you and I have talked about, off air here, is tip credits and tip pooling are an administrative project for any restaurant. It requires a lot of compliance, a lot of tight record keeping to ensure compliance. So, those are issues that would seem to be done away with here because you would probably, but what I think it really means is that restaurants would have to revamp the way they operate, and it might look more like a European model where tipping isn't really expected. Maybe you leave an extra dollar or two, you round up kind of thing. But it's priced into the meal itself. Um, and I think this is really an effort by the legislature to um, aggressively charge forward into that way of being. And so, like we were talking about before we started here today. I mean, there's some precedent for how restaurants might handle that, based on the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Baltimore City, and I'll say that we saw a ton of tip mandatory minimums in our restaurants here in the city, where because of the pandemic and because of employee shortages, that it was just automatic gratuity on your check, and you could always tip over top of that as well, which resulted in a lot of signs when you walk in the door warning you about this, telling you about this. And I think that's really from a practical standpoint. I think you know that's going to be kind of the struggle, is to figure out, well, how do we message this when it's not commonplace in other states and it's not happening elsewhere, and to the general population, how do we handle that and help customers understand? I think that's going to be a big piece, and it really will change the way that folks operate, and it'll change the way customers operate, let alone the businesses themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's very because right now, if you're a restaurant, you're paying someone 363 an hour, and they're making their money on tips, and you have to track that because you have to ensure that they're getting to the minimum wage. You have to make up any shortfalls in that. If they work overtime, that's got to be factored in. Um, and how overtime gets paid is a factor in all this too. So there's a lot of moving parts that would look a lot different if this law were to go through. Um, and so it's just something from for a restaurant owner, just to obviously got to keep a close eye on it. And I'm sure the restaurant lobby is taking positions and advocating right now. So it's something that I would follow very closely if I were a restaurateur. And but even just for everyone generally, as consumers at restaurants, things could look a lot different if this law goes through.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on, and will fundamentally change those things. But I agree with you, Russell. It'll be interesting to watch. And from the compliance perspective, I mean, we see a lot of clients come to us that aren't in compliance with all of those tip tip credit regulations that you're talking about, because it is a lot to try to keep up with and make sure that you're doing correctly. And a lot of people aren't doing it correctly, even if they mean to, right? So this will definitely simplify things in some way and complicate them in others, I think.
maybe less process, more direct cost to the business for sure. But it's going to end up being passed along to customers.
Yeah. Well, something to keep an eye on. Thanks, Russell. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.